Dear guests, on behalf of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, I would like to warmly welcome you to today's web talk. My name is Melanie Kögler and I'm the head of the Baden-Württemberg State Office of the Foundation. Many of you are already familiar with our events. For some, this may be your first time. So let me say a brief word about us. As the Baden-Württemberg State Office, we organize around 300 discussions, lectures and trainings each year, both online and in person. In addition, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom is active in more than 60 countries worldwide in support of democracy, the rule of law and human rights, and the foundation also supports talented students through scholarships. Today, we turn our attention to Argentina. Since late 2023, President Javier Milei has been pursuing an ambitious reform agenda. Inflation has fallen markedly since then, and the national budget has been stabilized. A key actor is the newly created Ministry of Deregulation and State Transformation, which aims to streamline government structures, reduce bureaucracy, and simplify rules and regulations. We would like to discuss how this deregulation agenda is being implemented in practice and what Germany can learn from it. I am very pleased that we have been able to secure two absolute experts for this discussion. Alejandro Carcasse works under President Milei and Minister Federico Sturzenegger on major structural reforms. His focus is on administrative simplification, regulatory quality, market liberalization, and institutional reforms in the public sector. Previously, he served as a member of the National Congress and contributed to economic reforms and the modernization of state structures. He holds a master in public administration from Harvard University and has a background in law and economics. Michael Link served as deputy head of the parliamentary group of the FDP in the German Bundestag from September 2023 to May 2025 for international policy, and from March 2022 to 2024 as the federal government's coordinator of transatlantic cooperation. Previously, among other roles, he was Minister of State for Europe at the Federal Foreign Office and Director of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. He is the Federal Treasurer of the FDP and the Deputy Chair of the Board of Trustees of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. The discussion will be moderated by my colleague, Dr. Hans-Dieter Holzmann. Hans-Dieter worked 25 years for the Deutsche Bank in senior strategic and operational roles. Since 2023, he has worked for the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, and since January 2026, he is the head of our foundation office in Buenos Aires for South America. My sincere thanks to all three of you for making today's event possible. You, dear guests, are warmly invited to contribute to your questions. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can also ask your questions in English, and Hans-Dieter Holzmann will translate them. We ask for your understanding if we should be unable to address all questions. With that, I now hand over to Dr. Hans-Dieter Holzmann and wish you all an interesting discussion.
Dear Melanie Kögler, many thanks for the introduction. Being originally from Stuttgart is always a great personal pleasure for me to hold events with you and your team of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation in Baden-Württemberg. Dear Secretario Alejandro Carcasse, buenas tardes. Many thanks for joining us today. It's a great honor to have you with us today. To kick off this web talk, Alejandro kindly agreed to give us a short introduction to demonstrate why deregulation is such an important topic in Argentina and how the Argentinian government identifies priorities and gets when deregulation actually done. In addition, he will give us a few tangible examples of the benefits of key deregulations the government has already implemented. Alejandro, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Hans-Dieter, for that introduction. Thank you, Melanie, as well. Also a pleasure to share this panel with Michael, that we became friends already when I visited there in Stuttgart. And it's really a pleasure to be here discussing policy with you and sharing some of the achievements we've had also in terms of the regulation and also seeing how that can be of use, of course, for the reforms you have ahead there in Germany, and also in particular in Baden-Württemberg and Stuttgart. I will share a short presentation, as Hans-Dieter said, about 15 minutes to look at some of the examples that we had in terms of deregulation and also in state transformations. And then, of course, I think we'll be completely open for questions and discussions, which is for sure the most interesting part. There I shared, I don't know if you are able to see the presentation already. Yeah. Are you able to see it? Yes. Okay. We call it chainsaw and deregulation because basically our ministry and the program that President Milei started is the idea of cutting expenses to consolidate the budget, which is the first thing we did, and also deregulation in the sense of going sector by sector of the economy and removing all barriers of entry to markets and fostering competition in the market. So this was the program. If you see, Argentina has been in a long spiral of decadence a long time. We had a decrease in per capita GDP, and this has achieved through the year 2023 directly economic collapse, in the sense that we had before beginning the administration of President Milei an inflation of over 200%, and that was probably the most harsh wake-up call for the country to say we have to do differently, and that's what allowed President Milei to have a very strong mandate for reform. I say this because sometimes when we ask how do we start a reform or how do we convince people that we need to change, well, we did it because we were in a very drastic situation. People understood that the fiscal deficit was so bad that we needed to change, and we needed to change radically, and we needed to set another course for the Argentinian state and the economy. So we had these two columns of policy. One was to achieve fiscal surplus immediately, which we did in only 1 month. When President Milei started in office, the fiscal deficit was 5% of GDP. After 1 month, we eliminated that deficit and we achieved a fiscal surplus. That we'll go a bit through that, how we managed to do it. And then the deregulation, which is, as I said, eliminating all the bureaucratic restrictions to markets, all the restrictions to competition, and which we found that it's very pro-business, of course, it's very pro small and medium-sized businesses, because by reviewing sector by sector of the economy, we have found that a lot of big companies of Argentina in the past had lobbied the government, either legally or illegally, to restrict those markets and to set up barriers to entry. So by removing those barriers to entry, we were able to make the market more competitive. And it's also very anti-corruption, because every time that the state, at least in Argentina, has an opportunity to allow or not or disallow a certain activity, then it becomes a room for corruption and for discretion. So deregulation has also served to decrease corruption in the country. There was a work that started actually before the government, conducted by the current minister Sturzenegger, because we had approximately 1 million regulations in the country. If you add up decrees, laws, resolutions, we literally had 1 million regulations. So we conducted a review of all of that. How was that review conducted? 1.5, 2 years before starting the government. So this is very useful if we want to achieve a profound deregulation program. That can be done while in government. It has to be prepared beforehand. And we basically, what we did is classify all the laws of the country. Now in office, we are actually doing it with the decrees and the resolutions, but classify every law in the country and say it's okay, we have to repeal it, or we have to modify it. And in case we have to modify it, it was writing the alternative. So imagine if we have 1 million regulations and we have 30,000 laws, we couldn't go through a lot of meetings and reading papers and reading reports. Basically, what the team accepted was only edited versions of the laws. This is the method, because even though I'm going to show some of the examples, I think probably what's most exportable is actually the method. When you have to review such a large amount of legislation, we did it this way: edited versions of the law. The people who contributed with the edited versions, that's what we actually looked at, and that ended up constituting these two piles that the minister presented to the president: deróguese, which is repealing all those laws were prepared to be repealed, and the other were modifications of the law, the other pile. Some major pieces of legislation we introduced at the beginning of the administration was the Decree 70. Right after all this preparation of work, allowed for, right after taking the administration, the following day issuing this Decree 70, that enabled deregulation in major sectors of the economy, like airlines, healthcare, state reform. And then that was complemented by the Ley Bases or Foundations Law, which also introduced reforms in energy, in mining, in great investments. It also gave delegated powers to the administration in order to reform the state. So many of the elimination of state agencies that you'll see were authorized by Congress through this law. And then with respect to resolutions and to decrees, what we've done is listening to the victims. There are a lot of victims of regulation: companies, producers, small businesses, that they've tried unsuccessfully many times to navigate through the regulation, and they are the ones that have let us know what to work on. So they started sending emails. Then we had meetings with chambers, associations, but we also saw that sometimes chambers represented only a sector of the producers. So we opened a platform which was called the Bureaucracy Platform. Last year, 2025, we received 25,000 complaints through the Report the Bureaucracy platform. So what the team does is gather that, classify it, and analyze it through artificial intelligence, through AI. And then what we do is the team starts like drafting proposals of reform, which we then discuss with different sectors with different agencies within the government. What has this allowed us to do? It has allowed us to already repeal or amend 14,000 articles of legislation. Examples of that: the fruit and vegetable industry. We had a lot of decrees, even going back to 1935, saying what the size of a garlic head had to be in order to be exported, or how the watermelon had to be packed. This created a lot of distortions for our producers, a lot of distortions for our exporters, with some ridiculous examples, like the one with the garlic. Actually, the producer who wrote us was exporting the garlic to South Korea to make mashed garlic or puree. So there was no point in controlling for the size of that. So there you see how, with this principle of not only making procedures simpler, but actually asking ourselves, does the state need to intervene in this? Or is something that we don't need to be requiring a permit or requiring a any kind of procedure before the state. That way we were able to reduce that pile you see for food and vegetable regulations for that very few pages. Yerba mate, for instance, our traditional infusion of like a tea. We had a lot of restrictions in the market, like you couldn't plant more than 5 hectares. The price of the input couldn't be higher than a certain price. There was a quality control on the yerba mate harvest. We removed all that. It didn't come through any sophisticated idea of how to design the market, but actually on the simple idea of letting the market operate freely without these restrictions set up by the state. Only by doing that, by removing restrictions, we increased production by 29%, we increased exports by 16%, and prices dropped for consumers 44%, just for allowing the market to operate freely without so many regulations. This is very important. It's not about being the smartest in designing a market. It's actually letting the private parties operating the market without trying to be smart in restricting them. Same thing happened with rent control or rent supply. We had a lot of these complicated rent control schemes, to how you could index a contract for inflation, how long could you lease an apartment, for how long could you lease an apartment, like many of these regulations. We had a lot of trouble in Buenos Aires for anybody who wanted to get an apartment. We removed all that. We said private parties can arrange whatever they want. They can settle the apartment in dollars or in pesos for how long they want. They can index it however they want. We did that, and immediately supply increased by 90%. 6 months after, supply increased by 200%. Now you can find an apartment very easily in Buenos Aires, unlike before. Internet provision. For some reason, provision of satellite internet was prohibited in Argentina because it was convenient for some companies to only have broadband provision. We say, why do we prohibit this? We have to remove the prohibition. We did it. Now we have 500,000 users of satellite internet, which for a country that is as vast as ours, and people in the mountains, people in rural areas, they are able to have internet connection that they didn't have before. Liberalization of passenger air travel. Before, you had to go through a lot of procedures in order to for an airline to have a new route of travel. There was a public hearing. Your competitors could participate in the public hearing, and they could tell you that better you don't create this new this new path or this new route. We eliminated all that. Now any company can start operating very easily. This resulted in 1 more million Argentinians having a commercial service or a flight within 50 kilometers of their homes. It was a drastic change, again, not by any sophisticated policy that we designed, but mostly by allowing the market to operate freely. Agricultural machinery or capital goods were not allowed to be imported from abroad, used ones in particular, if you didn't justify to the state that you needed them or that they were not producing the local market. You had to ask for a certificate from the state that lasted 84 days. So 3 months lost in asking for that. Then 1/5 of those requests were denied. You had to, you either couldn't access that or you had much higher prices from local companies. We eliminated those restrictions. You can buy whatever you want from wherever you want it. And this has allowed more than 1,000 companies to be part of this regime, and prices of agricultural machinery and capital goods have lowered. We took another measure, which was a decree that removed like non-tariff barriers, like in the name of safety or in the name of healthcare. We've had a lot of restrictions from products coming from abroad. So we said we have to stop that. Not anymore. Now, if a product follows high quality standards or comes from a high surveillance country, like if it has already gone through all the procedures you have, for instance, in Germany or the European Union to be marketed within the European Union, then it's also safe for us to market it here. We don't want that to constitute a non-tariff barrier to import. So by doing this, now basically anything that comes from an advanced country for any product basically is allowed to be marketed in Argentina directly. And this, as you've seen in the graph, is dramatically reducing prices for consumers of those goods. What is our mandate to be the freest economic country in the world? By rankings like this one of the Heritage Foundation, we were in the position 145, but just in 1 year we advanced 21 positions. The country that was able to advance the most in just 1 year. This was complemented, as I said, with a lot of cuts in the fiscal budget. We reduced the number of senior officials by 30% from 22 ministries to 8 ministries. The number of secretaries like me decreased drastically as undersecretaries, directors, and others. More than 400 areas were eliminated that were not needed. And this also 60,000 workers out of 280,000 workers in the central administration were fired. And the state still does all of its activities, so they were not needed, but there was a clear political decision to fire them. And this has allowed for consolidating the budget. Macroeconomics results, as Melanie said at the beginning, inflation has fallen dramatically because we are not spending money that we have. Poverty has fallen with 10 million people out of poverty. Employment has grown. The economy has grown 2 years in a row. So now we have a sound fiscal policy and a country that is recovering from its decadence. So many thought that this was impossible, but the president was very decisive in saying this is possible, and we've done it, and we are doing it, and we won the last election. We have now been able to pass a new labor reform just a few days ago, and we have a lot more structural reforms to present this year to Congress and to continue on this path of growth for Argentina. So thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here with you talking.
Impressive. Muchas gracias, Alejandro. Very inspiring and valuable insights which you presented on the deregulation and the fight against bureaucracy in Argentina, which will form a good basis for our discussion today. As a brief reminder to the audience, I see already the questions coming in, so please keep on sending your questions, what you are interested to ask. As Melanie said at the beginning, you can post in English, aber sehr gerne auch auf Deutsch, und ich übersetze dann. Dear Michael Link, many thanks for agreeing to join us today to this web talk. We know each other since nearly 40 years, since joint times with the Junge Liberale, the Young Liberals in Baden-Württemberg, and therefore always a great pleasure to have the opportunity to work on political topics together with you. My question, Michael, to you today: why does Germany and Baden-Württemberg seem to have such huge difficulties in reducing bureaucracy for companies, but also for citizens to make more room for freedom? And what, in your view, can be done about it?
Thank you, Hans-Dieter, and hello to everybody, both in Baden-Württemberg or in Germany, and especially to Alejandro in Buenos Aires. It's fantastic to see you. And to listen to you, you had some new slides compared to what you showed us at our party convention in Stuttgart. And you mentioned the labor market reform. I'm full of respect with what you decided there, bringing in the formal sector, more people in the formal sector. That's fantastic. To your question, Hans-Dieter, the whole thing is with bureaucracy. I know nobody can stand anymore listening to politicians talking about reducing bureaucracy. But therefore, it's very important that we simply remind ourselves and our fellow citizens that bureaucracy is very often coming in disguise of beautiful consumer protection, or of nice sounding labor force protection, or environmental protection. And every project for itself might be good, but it adds and adds and adds layers of regulations, prescriptions, and exactly bureaucracy. So it comes with good intentions, but to abolish it is so difficult. And that is why we are today, as a classical welfare state of the European style, in a situation where layers and layers and layers of well-intended things now add up and accumulate to less competitiveness, especially on the world stage. And that is why we need to have the courage to do less regulation. Very clearly inspired, I like the word inspiration, what Alejandro mentioned and what you mentioned, inspired by the Argentinian example. It's not about copy-paste. Very often countries are also different, but what can be compared, and that is what really fascinates me about this example, which we heard right now and saw in the charts, that you can do reforms in a situation where most of the world said, no, this cannot be reformed, and were already giving up. And let's be honest, a lot of entrepreneurs are leaving Germany now, going also from Baden-Württemberg, since they don't think that reforms can be done. But we have to do that. The Free Democrats, the Liberals, we want to do that. And that is why it's so important to do that right now in our state elections in Baden-Württemberg.
Thanks, Michael. I will start now already including the first questions from the audience. Alejandro, you visited Stuttgart at the beginning of the year, so you may have more than just an outside-in perspective actually on Germany and on Baden-Württemberg. And one of the questions from the audience is, what is your opinion on the current European Union and German tendency towards increasing regulation and institutional control? What's the perception in Argentina, and also your personal one, maybe after your visit to Stuttgart, on the situation in the European Union and Germany?
Well, you know, that day I was in Stuttgart at the party convention. At a point, we had a meeting with some people from a construction company there, and they told me what they were going through, and it resounded a lot with things that I hear also in Argentina. Argentina is a federal state, right? So we have the federal government, the provincial government, the city government. So to begin with, you have a lot of duplication of competencies and duplication of procedures. You sometimes hear like the most absurd examples, like, I don't know, like establishments that produce cleaning supplies, and somebody from the federal government comes and say, look here, in order to allow for this place to work here, you need to like have doors open. And then the provincial government comes and says, no, you need to have your doors closed. So they have they start. I mean, that's a very simplistic, but they actually have told me cases like that. So they need to see how to comply with some simultaneous requests from different levels of government, and that sometimes are also contradictory. So I recall, like with this construction company, when they were telling me through the different layers of regulation that they have there, which you've basically created a federation at the continental level with another level of government. So you have all the regulations, directives, rules that comes from the European Union. Then you have the ones from your own federal state. Then you have the ones from your own state government, and then you also have at the city level. So This is a bit what Michael was saying about the layers of regulation. They are imposed by different levels of government. Bureaucrats, once they exist, they need to justify their existence. And either they do it because they need to have something to do, because they need to justify their power, sometimes because they believe in what they do, in the sense that the bureaucrat who is in charge of safety thinks that has to deal with, like, set up a lot of requirements so as to guarantee that safety. Or the one that it's concerned with health, they know they need to, like, create a lot of these requirements so they make sure things are healthy. But what they don't realize usually is the cost they are imposing on society, the cost they are imposing on business by trying to make things safer or make things healthier. So what ends up happening is that they add up on the cost. And even for risks that are very low or risks that are non-existent, they create a huge amount of cost. So there needs to be someone within government who looks at that, who has more of an economics perspective in saying, no, look, there is a risk perhaps, but it's not worth to create such cost structure or regulation in order to avoid that risk, because every economic activity has risk. The point is how much of a cost you impose to eliminate that risk. And I see that the typical bureaucrat, either here in Argentina or in Germany or in the European Union, doesn't look at that cost. So that's the first thing we need to think about. And the second is that even when there are initiatives of simplification, they usually are about, okay, let's say there is this procedure that you have to do before the government and it takes 60 days. Okay, let's work on how we make it 30 days instead of 60. But no, the question should be more radical. Does this procedure before the state need to be done? Does the state need to require this permit? What does this permit? What's the sense of requiring a certain permit or permission from the state? So the fundamental question to ask ourselves in every state intervention is: does it need to continue existing, or can we get rid of it?
Thank you, Alejandro. Like you had the opportunity to travel to Stuttgart at the beginning of the year, Michael had the opportunity to travel to Argentina and Uruguay at the end of last year, where we had a full agenda of 1 week in both countries in November. So, Michael, maybe a question also to you, which I would like to combine with a question from the audience. Can you give us, in a nutshell, some observations you made from your trip to Argentina? And also, one of the questions from the audience is, despite everything Alejandro told us about the deregulation, about the positive momentum in Argentina, you get sometimes in the German press the impression that the reputation in Argentina is quite negative. Why do you think that is the case?
Well, frankly speaking, reports about Argentina in most cases are pretty much biased. By political conceptions which the journalists either bring to Argentina, stereotypes about the country which you will not see living proof to when you go there. So instead of talking about Argentina, I wanted to see it on the spot. And the work of our political foundations, of Naumann Foundation, is extremely precious, since it brings the possibility, and everybody can follow your blogs and your reports in German, Hans-Dieter. It's so important that we have people on the ground like you. My eye-opening experience in Argentina was, I was expecting, like many German media said, a lot of protests on the streets and whatever. No, I was coming exactly in the time where President Milei and his political alliance, it's a broad alliance of political supporters, just got an enormous and overwhelming support and success in the electoral campaign, in the elections, in the midterm elections, end of October. And that shows that you can do tough reforms chainsaw. Yes, indeed. A lot of things what Alejandro showed was very clearly not simply reducing bureaucracy, but simply also deleting special regulations. And you can get support for that and even have success in elections. That is, I think, the most important takeaway. There is public support for that. Yes, there are also protests, like in every democracy. And Argentina is a vibrant democracy with a freedom of press, and especially with a strong parliament and with a strong independent judiciary. So it is a democracy unlike, and a very well-functioning democracy, unlike the stereotypes we hear very often, unfortunately, in the German media. And as there are no German journalists on the spot, with the exception of, let's say, one or two correspondents, not even based in Buenos Aires, from our public TV, it is very important to inform yourself about this fantastic country and about the developments there. Alejandro showed the chart reducing poverty. You can see that also. Go to the UNICEF data, which has fantastic data, how much child poverty was reduced in Argentina. So a lot of good examples. I can only advise everybody and recommend to everybody, don't only follow what you hear in some media, make you a perfect and 360-degree picture, and then we will see that this is a reform widely supported by the population and on a good track.
Thank you, Michael. We received several questions for Alejandro about the best way actually to convince citizens that reforms and change is necessary, and how do you win actually popularity? How do you convince actually people to understand the necessity of reforms so that you actually have, the breadth and you actually can show a positive track record and have the support of the people? And when do you actually have to begin? You mentioned that you already prepared before you were actually in power before the elections of 2023. So can you describe a little bit how you prepared and how that then actually resulted into the election campaign, and then step by step how you were actually able to keep the positive momentum and the support of people for further reforms?
Yeah, I think what was key in Argentina is that we had reached a bottom, in the sense that things couldn't be worse. Like we had a 200% inflation. We've had a crisis of inflation before in history, but now the link became very clear between the excess of public spending and inflation. And Milei was very articulate in explaining that. He said, we are monetizing the deficit. We are printing money to finance the deficit. And because we print so much money, that's what's bringing inflation. And he was very skillful in explaining that. So I think it was the first time people understood that either we consolidated the big fiscal budget or we were not going to be able to solve the problem of inflation. Other governments had tried to consolidate the budget before, and they were not popular. They didn't succeed to do it. And now Milei could do it just in 1 month. But it was mainly because the situation had got to be so bad in terms of the 200% inflation, and because he explained that link so clearly. That is what's particular to Argentina. I do realize the challenge that if you live in a society that is more well off, that has a better quality of life, as it is the case of Germany, of course, you will have a bit more difficult task in terms of creating a sense of urgency. But what it's important is to show what direction things are going. If things are going bad, or because the demands on businesses to operate are too strong, because you become less competitive with respect to other markets, that can be something that shows sense of urgency. Sharing the stories of the victims. Sharing, because sometimes when we talk of deregulation, people think that perhaps you're trying to help big companies, or it's not the case. You have tons of examples of small and medium-sized businesses, of rural producers that are hurt because they don't know how to navigate the regulatory landscape. And if you do like we did, like open a platform and get their experiences through emails, videos, or any way they can share them on the internet, they are replicable because other people feel they are living the same situation, and this way you create a more popular demand for deregulation, and at least that's how it's been in our case.
Thank you, Alejandro. I'd like to pick up another question from the audience for you, which I think is very interesting from an Argentinian perspective, but also highly relevant for the political situation in Germany. How does it come that in Argentina, the dramatic economic situation didn't help the right-wing or left-wing radicals, like it would happen, most likely, I would add from the question, in Germany, but the libertarians? And how can we adapt this? Was it the lectures of Javier Milei in the streets or something else? Why did the radicals not benefit from the situation?
I think to explain that in our own terms of political divisions, it's very clear that one of the popular movements in the past that has been the Peronist Party has been very responsible in terms of spending. They've had the worst periods of inflation, like this one we had under President Fernandez with 200% inflation. There was a previous government that was the Macri government that tried to consolidate the budget. Actually, it brought the fiscal deficit down from 4% of GDP to 0.5% of GDP, but it did it along 4 years, and it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough because then he couldn't win the election, because the adjustment, for instance, in energy prices was very unpopular, because he couldn't defeat inflation either. So that also created an opportunity for President Milei to say we have to do this more drastically. We cannot wait for 4 years. Like, for instance, there was a great policy discussion here if the economic plan should be gradual in the sense of being implemented along the years, or had to be something drastic and a kind of shock on the economy. And the shock argument won, because basically what was explained is that we are doing so badly that we cannot wait. And that's why, as I said, the fiscal deficit was corrected in only 1 month. But it was especially this 200% inflation that made the argument by itself. And that's what it allowed a president like Milei saying we need to reduce spending to win, rather than somebody saying we solve this in a populist way by spending more and making the state intervene more. Because people already realized by then that idea of the state spending more had failed and had brought us the inflation that basically was like the government giving you more money, but then it took out of your pockets because of how you lost purchasing parity with inflation. So this was the narrative in Argentina. You have to find your own narrative for change, of course, but I think the narrative for change is always linked to what direction things are taking, and creating a sense of urgency of needing to stop or change direction, which I know from hearing from people on the ground there that you have a lot of examples of that.
Yeah, picking up on that sense of urgency, and a question for Michael. Many people agree to reduce bureaucracy, and then we see but. For example, we see different excuses why removal of bureaucracy is not possible, and. What possibilities do we have to remove the famous but? We all know we will not have much time left to act before others take actions and before even a bigger number of companies will leave Germany. And may I add to the question from the audience, Baden-Württemberg, Michael? What do we do? You're on mute.
Thank you. Alejandro and you both used the term sense of urgency. We have to explain that the situation is really even extremely urgent. And it is very much about explaining, yeah? Since German voters were used to, let's say, living without problems in geopolitics, living mostly in a safe haven where all the dangers from the international arena were not really coming to us, and used to the fact that we always lived from our strong export goods, especially in Baden-Württemberg. But that's over. We have to explain that is over. The world is not turning anymore about Europe, around Europe, not even, especially not about Baden-Württemberg. And the international situation is a huge exclamation mark for action. China is not reliable. Russia is extremely aggressive. We need the sanctions. So a lot of export markets have become much more difficult. And in addition to the US, which for us has a totally unpredictable tariff policy. So all that brought our export market, and we are dependent from exportation in a super urgent situation. The only way out is, for the time being, since we cannot change from our side what happens in Russia or the US, let alone vote in another president in the USA. What we can change, the only thing we can change, is our own competitiveness. And that is why FDP concretely proposes to delete 2 layers of administration, 2 administrative layers, in German Regierungspräsidium und Regionalverband, in Baden-Württemberg, for example, and to distribute their competences, part of it to the municipalities, but also other parts of it completely deleted where possible. So that is indeed a political process where we need political partners to do that. And with this very clear pro-market approach, I'm pretty confident that we can find enough voters in Germany who support that. But, well, we are still in the middle of the campaign, and that is why we try to explain that the international situation for a producer and for a state like ours is a really exclamation mark for action.
Thanks, Michael. Let me come back maybe to what you just mentioned, the geopolitical environment we live in. And a big piece of deregulation, obviously, was the ratification of the EU-Mercosur agreement last week by Argentina and by Uruguay, which nudged the European Commission to initiate the provisional implementation application of the agreement. Question maybe to both of you: how happy, how satisfied are you with the EU-Mercosur agreement? And particularly to Alejandro, but maybe also from Michael's perspective, how do you see that when you take into account on the other side the bilateral agreement Argentina and the United States just negotiated in impressive 6 months compared to more than 25 years for the EU-Mercosur agreement? So how do you see this international trade cooperation, economic, political cooperation playing out currently? What's your perspective and vision?
Well, we are very happy about it, very satisfied. Argentina is a very closed economy. We only have agreements with 10% of the global GDP, while our neighboring Chile has agreements with 85% of the global GDP. If you measure by exports and imports with respect to GDP, out of 15 Latin American economies, Argentina is the last in terms of integrating to foreign trade, even after Brazil, that is very closed. So for us, these are opportunities to open up our economy. Like with the agreement, Mercosur, European Union takes us to about 35% of global GDP. And then the agreement with the US, and we are all for free trade agreements now, as we are doing with other countries. We are negotiating with Canada. We signed another one with EFTA. We signed this agreement with the United States, which is not exactly a free trade agreement, but it removes a lot of barriers to trade, both tariff and non-tariff barriers. So for us, it's an example of what has to work, which is free trade. Protectionism in Argentina has created a lot of damage, has been very hurtful. So we are going the other way, which is opening up for trade, and the Mercosur European Union agreement is a great example of that.
Michael, your perspective on the EU-Mercosur agreement?
Totally agree. It was long overdue. Let's remind everybody how long we negotiated about that. It was stuck. Then a little bit of movement, then stuck again, and then stuck again. And mostly it was stuck because of additional requirements by the Germans, by Europeans, by the French, by the Italians, for new areas of consumer protection, of agricultural protection, etc., etc., etc. So this is really something which should be in place since long, but maybe here the sense of urgency finally prevailed. Without the sense of urgency, without the geopolitical situation and the challenges we are facing from close allies like the US or from rivals like China and Russia, maybe we would never made it, but okay, better late than never. But we should not stop there. It's very important to understand that a free trade agreement is not something which is simply for what we are doing for big business. No, it is for giving the market a chance, and it's a possibility, especially for small and medium-sized entrepreneurs, without a lot of bureaucratic hurdles to export in other places, but also to opening up for goods which come from the partner country. And here we have to be very careful that the European Union is not again, under disguise of consumer protection, closing the little openings we have now by the agreements in disguise of consumer protection. They're very, very important. And then let's go together for further. EU-India is a good step forward. We need finally the EU-Australia agreement, which is now under negotiation since, I think, much more than a decade, even 2 decades. And that is very, 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 very much what is now, what needs to happen now, and not only, and not someday in the future.
Thank you, Michael. Let's look a little bit to the future from the Argentinian side. We heard President Javier Milei last Sunday in the Congress when he opened the parliamentary season, and he declared 2026 as the year of structural reforms, and we will make the Congress very busy, I think, with 90 initiatives for reforms, which he will present to the Congress this year. Question from the audience for you, Alejandro. What do you think will be the biggest challenges to sustaining long-term reforms in Argentina? Also, given that in the past there were always times in Argentina where reforms tried to be initiated, but they were also only from a very short-term perspective actually successful. And what reforms do you think are most critical for restoring confidence further among investors and international partners?
Well, to tell you the truth and be very direct, in order to restore confidence, we need to keep winning elections because what every investor here asks when they come is like, we like what you're doing, we like how the country is going now and the direction is taken, but will you be able to sustain that? And that depends on a political process. Argentina, as Michael said, is a lively democracy. There is a lot of debate. There is like parties that are alternating government. So what happened before is that we couldn't at another time sustain that in the population in terms of convincing that that was the right path. I think this time, particularly because of how much inflation has lowered, because of this economic stability we have, because of the good results in terms of macroeconomic indicators that I showed, first we were able to win the midterms, which was a surprise to everybody. Now the president has a very good approval rating. Now we are a Congress that is more sympathetic to the reforms we promote. So we have to keep working on that. We need to arrive to 2027 showing that this model, this economic model has worked. And that's what will allow for the re-election of the president or for continuing these policies. So it's something that in a democracy you cannot guarantee forever, but as long as you continue producing results, even with my presentation, you saw my presentation in Stuttgart, as Michael said, you saw some new slides now. If next time we meet, I don't show you that we have 5, 6 new achievements, it won't be interesting anymore. So we have to keep working in showing that we are able to produce results, and that's how politics works. So we know that, and we work non-stop in order to achieve that.
Question to Micha. Thanks, Alejandro. It's very exciting to watch Argentina right now. A bright global example of liberalism is long overdue. How can we leverage the Argentinian example and inspiration for liberalism?
It's very important to talk about it and to inform people about that, since, I repeat, a lot of media only bring a very fragmented or even biased picture about what is indeed happening in Argentina, and especially not reporting that there was, as Alejandro said, public support, winning the midterms on this reform agenda. So it's very important to talk about that, but not only to talk about that, but also to really broaden the cooperation. Argentina, for example, can for Germany be one of the best energy partners in the world. It's not only a place where we can export our machinery and import things from Argentina, but especially energy cooperation would be good. And then let's try also to work closer together also on the political level. We have, and that is really fantastic, Alejandro as a guest on our party convention. Let's create more such opportunities. It is one of the most, let's say, closest places in the mindset that you can imagine on this earth when you come to Argentina. And I think the same vice versa. We have so much in common. Let's work on that. And I stop here, since I think people prefer to hear more from Alejandro.
Thank you, Michael. As we are approaching already the end of our web talk, I would like to apologize that we haven't been able to address all questions. One I will answer myself in the chat. The question, will we receive the presentation? Yes, and we are also publishing the YouTube video, so you can share it with your friends who haven't had the opportunity to listen to Alejandro and Michael today. The questions show the huge interest we have in Germany in the current developments in Argentina, and what Germany and Baden-Württemberg can maybe learn from Argentina to reduce bureaucracy and implement reforms for more growth, investment, and freedom. Instead of a summary from my side, which would be impossible to make after all the food for thought the two of you presented, I would like each of you a just very brief 1-minute question. 1 minute, please. Alejandro, to you. If you were seconded by the Argentinian government to Germany to help us reducing bureaucracy based on your experience in Argentina, what would be your top recommendations for Germany to do this successfully? In 1 minute.
What a responsibility, really. I think it was about the answer could be a bit about the method. Like the question to answer is not how to make things more simple or more efficient in terms of the state procedure, but actually asking ourselves whether we need that procedure at all, whether we need that state intervention at all. And I'm sure that if you listen to producers, small and medium-sized businesses there in Germany or in your state, you will get a lot of examples where they will say, look, the German government or the Baden-Württemberg government or the European Union are requiring us, you must have listened to this 1,000 times, like they are requiring us to fulfill this requirement, to present this document, to comply with this regulation, which is actually not needed. That by itself will produce the path to follow. And well, I see there's been a lot of interesting questions here, and I see that more questions are coming up that we are able to answer. But one thing that I see here that they ask, which is important, it's about bureaucracy being recreated or about regulatory authorities. Sometimes, for us, let me give you this example. For us, bureaucracy is like this mythical monster of the Hydra, I think it's called, that you cut one head and then more heads grow. So many of the regulations we eliminated, then the public agencies themselves have found a way to reenact them or create a new resolution or go around and restore what they had. So sometimes you need to take the decision of cutting all the heads completely. That is eliminating the agency altogether, eliminating that area of the government altogether. And we've done that with many agencies within the state. So it does require a lot of decision. If we were able, as I said, to fire 60,000 government employees, that's not an easy thing to do, but you need to have the decision to change the way you operate things. And that would be like my lesson to share. And by the way, it's been a great pleasure to listen to Michael. It is really my pleasure to listen to you because the political experience you have and the places you've been and all you know from that and the perspective you have is really wonderful. So it's really a pleasure for me to share this panel with you.
Thanks, Alejandro. Michael, question to you, 1 minute. Given your professional background as a long-standing liberal policymaker, what are your top ideas to finally get deregulation done in Germany and Baden-Württemberg?
Yeah. Well, as I said, have the courage to not only delete individual regulations, but to delete layers of administrative layers. Without the courage to cut there, you will definitely have always a lot of more problems to implement the most perfect ideas of deregulation if at the same time you don't have the courage also to cut the administrative layers themselves. And I would love, of course, that more Germans would have the opportunity or simply study what is happening in other places in the world in terms of deregulation, and not to believe any biased reporting about that, but to study the case itself. And I think the Naumann Foundation gives a lot of opportunities for that. Thank you very much, Alejandro, for your inspiring example.
Thank you, Michael. With that, I would like to thank our two speakers today, Alejandro Carcase and Michael Link, for their insightful, valuable, and inspiring contributions. I would also like to thank you, the audience, the participants, for your participation, for your questions, for your interest. And I would like to thank my colleague Melanie Kögler and her team at the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom office in Baden-Württemberg for organizing this web talk today. And now I wish you a schönen Abend.